Well, shaking cats and kittens, Rob Lee here for this month's presenting sponsor, Night Owl Gallery. Night Owl Gallery is an intimate, artist-run exhibition space showcasing the original paintings and fine art prints of Beth Ann Wilson. Also, it features curated goods from local artists and craftsmen. You'll be sure to find one-of-a-kind gifts, handcrafted jewelry, home decor items, along with a few vintage treasures. Located in the rear of 248 South Conklin Street in Highlandtown, across from Sally O's, Night Owl Gallery is a unique space that brings together Wilson's love of the arts, community, and culture. Additionally, Night Owl Gallery hosts an array of arts and crafts workshops throughout the year and participates in community events, many of which are free and open to the public. So in this ever-changing world, safety is their priority. So feel free to join them and hit them up online at www.nightowl.gallery. Tell them Rob Lee sent you. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and this is on the MTR Podcast. Today's guest is a self-taught machinist and sculptor who produces beautiful art using machining and multiple materials. Please welcome Chris Bathgate to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Sure.
You know, definitely when I get a referral from a guest and they're like, no, you think I would do good stuff. You need to check out this person. And then you were super receptive. I have your book here. Part of you and an extension of you is in my studio. So if you will, describe your work and your background for those who are uninitiated.
Okay, sure. I guess for starters, I'm a self-taught machinist and art school dropout is the way I like to frame it. So when we say self-taught machinist and sculptor, it's because I sort of, I grew up in Baltimore. I attended a public arts high school in Towson called Carver Center. And then I went to MICA I wanted to be an artist, and I was going to go to college and learn how to be an artist. And that didn't work out remotely as I had planned it. So I ended up actually dropping out. And that's a very long and complicated story. But from there, I was just very interested in learning technical skills, skill building, how to build things. And that very quickly led me into metal work and machine work and collecting tools and learning how to use them. So for those who aren't familiar with what machining work is or what machining is, the simplest answer is the sort of reductive removal of materials, primarily metal, using a couple of primary processes of milling, drilling, turning, sort of like cutting tools and things like that. But more complicated than that is there's sort of industrial processes used for making almost everything you can think of, like car parts, airplanes. It's sort of when you see pictures of how NASA is building the rover, that kind of tooling and equipment for making utilitarian goods. But I approach those tools to make sculpture, to make art. So
tell us about the process a little bit more, and what drew you to this medium versus like others. Like we talked a little bit beforehand. I believe a certain metal was besmirched as being essentially ceramic. So what drew you to, I guess, the materials that you're working with, and tell us about that process, maybe from that selection standpoint, or that kind of like what does it look like in, I guess, simple terms?
I think, let me think about that for a second.
Sure.
I guess what drew me to the process or how I found myself in getting involved in machine work is really the story of like, as I started dropping out of art school, I was very interested in when I dropped out of art school, it wasn't because I didn't want to be an artist. It's because I was frustrated that I wasn't getting the sort of technical skills that I wanted to build things. I had things in my head I wanted to build, and I wasn't learning them in a critique environment where we're just talking about conceptual ideas. I wanted to build things, and I didn't have the actual, technical assets to build them. And so when I started building my own studio, I just quickly realized that I have to sort of acquire equipment and learn how to use it myself. And that sort of became this sort of like lifelong love of learning kind of grew out of that, because I had these ideas in my head that I wanted to make, and I had these, the energy, because I was young, but I didn't have the knowledge. And so, I just started consuming literature about metalworking and just different sort of fabrication methods. I started out just doing welding, but it quickly escalated into very technical pieces of equipment and machine tools and acquiring milling machines. And from there, I started building my own computer operated equipment, because I was broke. I mean, I'm an artist, so, I was broke, and I had these tools I wanted to fold into my practice, but I didn't have the means to buy them. So I had to build them. And so I started scavenging manufacturing forums and talking to anyone who would listen or answer my questions, and sort of, I just happened to be doing this in the early 2000s, when there's sort of this like perfect storm of, the evolution of the internet, the beginning of the maker movement, access to off the shelf sort of like motion technology, like cheap electronics from China and that sort of thing, where I actually could afford to sort of buy all this import equipment and cobble together an actual working robotic machine tool. Nowadays, if you just go on YouTube, you can simply Google like how to make a CNC milling machine, and like someone will show you exactly where to buy it and how to put it together, and you can do it like in a month. But in early 2000, it was definitely like a different beast. And but all of that along the way sort of informed my aesthetic and my approach to sculpture, which is that I sort of have this very formalistic approach to my material. I'm looking at it sort of antiseptically of what sort of forms and shapes that it's good for, but at the same time, it's always a pretext for learning something new. So I am, with each sculpture, I'm sneaking in some sort of skill building exercise or some sort of little intellectual thing to keep me interested, to keep me involved in growing as a craftsman and as an artist.
That's legit. I was getting that off of you when you were describing like this is an opportunity to learn something, and I think especially with that point when you got into it, it's like you got to learn these things, and once you get to a spot, it's like I know what my thing is now. I know how I'm going to go about this from the most foundational way. Now, how can I increase that degree of difficulty? Because I believe that that's what keeps us interested. Like, for my day job, I'm not a huge fan of certain elements of it, but if I can do something to make it really hard and then make myself dig a way out of it, it's like now I have another route to get back home. And that's my approach to podcasting too, where I always look at it like I'll go to a studio. It may not be my studio. I know what's in my studio. I know how to set everything up. But sometimes I may try to say, all right, let me not say, I'm going to exclude this word from my, lexicon for this particular podcast. Or if I'm out of my space, I have to go to someone else's. They may not have everything I need. It's like, all right, how can I MacGyver this shit? That's the thing, and I think that's the thing that really keeps you interested. So I pick up what you're putting down there.
I guess, I mean, I've sort of had this habit of whenever I would, when I was younger, when I get into something, I would learn it. And I would get, really, and I think a lot of people have this experience. Like you just get really into something and you learn everything you can about it. And then everything about it. And all of a sudden you're just sort of, okay, I'm bored now. What can I do next? And, luckily machine work is one of these just rare things. It's a very holistic craft. It touches literally everything. Like there's nothing you can touch in your room or my room unless you have some very primitive pottery that hasn't been on something that is either directly manipulated by machine tools or on another piece of equipment that has been made with machine tools. There's just, it literally touches everything. And as you learn about that process, you learn about physics, you learn about engineering, you learn about electronics, you learn about chemistry, you learn, it touches all these other spheres of knowledge. And it's this never ending like rabbit hole of constant new things to learn. I've been doing it for 20 years, and there's just no end to it. There's always something more to learn. It's just that deep of a field. And so it's just, I've never gotten bored with it. I've never outgrown it, like so many other things I've sort of taken on in my life. And find that very refreshing and fascinating.
Yeah. I like self-taught podcasting, audio engineering, all of that stuff. And been doing it for almost 13 years in February. And it's one of those things where you can know the technical aspects about recording audio, but then you can learn something in editing, or you can learn something in how to conduct an interview, or which apparently I'm terrible at, or
I can't notice if you,
but you're learning all of these different things, even when it comes to like public speaking, or I've been taking like little acting lessons here and there, just different things that you can take from to ultimately build into what you're doing. And that makes it that much interesting and that much more rewarding, because those skills, as they say in the job world, right, is, oh, they're transferable. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. But I'm the one that has to seek these things out and be interested in them. It's the same as I'm hearing from you. So when I see your images, especially in your book, Chris Bathgate, the machinist sculptor, I think of drawings of like otherworldly Philip K. Dick sci-fi weapons, or even like stuff like Men in Black, and like really, that's I can't get it out of my head. Like that's the way I kind of see it, and it has this like shininess that's like almost. Do you remember the Lost City Diner, like in Baltimore? That's in Station North, and they have like all of this stuff, like 50s like era comics. So like so that's kind of what I see. And I don't know if you've heard it before, but what, if any, like that really pop out, memorable responses have you had to your work, to whether seeing it in your book, whether seeing it online on your website, or seeing it in person? What kind of memorable responses come to mind for you?
I think, your reaction to my work isn't, it's not wrong. It's not abnormal. I guess I try to couch, my response to say that, machine work is one of these things that, it's been around for a couple centuries, but it's tied, its dominance in our society is tied to the Industrial Revolution. And out of that grew, the golden age of science fiction, ray gun Gothic, and and Art Deco, and all of that stuff is a direct reaction to these tools and this technology. And when you think of the golden age of science fiction, all of the props, all of the stuff, it's just repurposed industrial to try to like smash together spray painted silver. Yeah. And so the aesthetic of my process is deeply tied to science fiction aesthetic. It's deeply tied to, you're basically thinking about rudimentary forms you can make using these tools and equipment. You're in that world. But my approach to my work is a very sort of engineering approach. And how can I design and build a sculpture, or be it mechanical or be it purely aesthetic, in 4 dimensions, because it's a hard thing to describe, but when you're making a shape or making a part, you have to really think about the order of processes that you're going to apply to make that final form, because you basically just start with a hunk of metal and you have to carve it down, but you have to hold it very tightly in to cut metal. And so you have to, fixture it. You have to think about which features you make first and which features you make second. So you really just, you start with a visual concept, but you have to work backwards as an engineer to make that object. And so there's a whole lot of push and pull in there with competing interests of logistics and visual nature. And so I don't concern myself with the sci-fi aesthetic thing too much. I think what's interesting to me is to sort of lean on implied functionality, and that sort of has its own sort of loaded potential for fiction, but I'm not interested in creating fiction. And so that's my response to your take on it. But I would say I think a lot of people tend to just bring themselves to the work because it is abstract. It is sort of this non-committal formalism. And so some people, when they look at it, they see science fiction. Other people see engineering principles. If you put my work in front of a physicist, they're just going to just riff on and on about, what sort of, I went to I did a show at the National Academy of Physics down in DC. I probably said that wrong. But all the physicists came to me like, do you know what the magnetic field of this object would be? And they just see it through their worldview. Yeah. And I think the work, I intentionally like sort of keep things nebulous so that can happen, because I actually learn a lot from other people that way, and it helps change my perspective on some of the pieces that I've made. And other people just, they see jewelry making and they see, architecture and other things. So there's just a lot there when you're working with sort of geometry and mathematics and engineering. I think there's so much overlap. Yeah. You can sort of push it through any lens you want, and it works. And I think that's more interesting than saying exactly what it should be.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's legit. That's legit.
Okay.
Absolutely. No. Because I didn't want to feel like I didn't want to sound like I was just it's sci-fi stuff.
Yeah. But no, there's totally like it's. I had a collector tell me, this is steampunk and you should educate yourself because that's what it is. And I was just like, oh, well, thank you for your opinion.
I think
I know what it is, but okay.
I think it's like part of like, it's this and all of these other things, depending as you said, where you're viewing it. Like,
yeah. And very frequently is it this or is it this? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about creative blocks a little bit. See, I slid this one in there because while you weren't looking, I slid this one in. How do you deal with creative blocks, or do you encounter those? And because I would imagine everyone has a different view, especially in talking to you're probably one of the more unique people I've talked to. First time I talked to a machinist. But how do you deal with creative blocks?
I guess methodically. I don't know if that makes sense. I think every artist experiences this when you finish. You worked on something for 3 months, and you just like, okay, that was the last good idea I'm ever gonna have. Uh-huh. But I go back to the sort of the beginning of this conversation where I'm always trying to learn something new. So if I really do find myself stuck, I can always just lean on that and sit back and just be like, well, what am I missing? There's obviously something I could, pour. If I don't have any good creative ideas, what's something I can learn?
Yeah.
And very quickly you get yourself involved in some little task like that, and the ideas just kind of come back out. And I think it's worked very well for me. And I always tend to have like 4 or 5 ideas kind of cooking, because I get so far with something and I just can't move it forward anymore. So I just set it aside. And so it also helps to have like a couple of projects that are in different stages. Yeah. And I had a surgery a couple months ago and I had a lot of downtime and I thought, okay, well, this is the time I'm going to work on this big drawing I've been working on forever. And I sat down and I started working on it. It wasn't going anywhere. Like I just couldn't, you can't force it. So I just set that aside and I just let myself doodle a little bit. And the next thing I know, the rest of my plans for the year have changed and I'm making something else. And I think that's a good approach too, to just change directions, work on something else.
No, that's legit. And I don't want to continue, but making the comparison, but I think from a standpoint of artists and all of that stuff, this is not the only thing that I'm doing. So going to your point about having things in different stages, if let's say if this is going slow and I have a few bad interviews, and it's like, damn, am I bad at this or have you? And I might go into doing more of the movie review podcast that I do, or more of the comedy podcast that I do. And that kind of serves it. Like I'm actively doing it, and, or even if it's like the pursuit of doing something else. So let's say I might do an advertisement for someone. That's a different skill set than sitting there and just doing an interview with someone. So it's more editing on my end. And it's like, all right, am I just reading something live? Am I improv-ing it? Am I ad-libbing and so on? And it's just like that enables me to stretch a little bit more, to have a different approach to how I'm putting together these podcasts, or even some of the guests that I would reach out to. It's like, this person going to be interesting. This person is a drip. And, what am I getting out of this? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important, like changing directions. I don't, it took me a while to realize just how much work gets done in the background of your head, and so sometimes you don't feel like you're working on something. You change directions, give it a month, but you're still working on that thing in there somewhere. And so I have so many designs that I might only spend 20 hours of real time working on drafting it or working on designing it, but I've only done it an hour here, an hour there over the whole. I've worked on it it takes a year to get that much time in, and so there's just a lot of when you just. I have a lot of drawings. I just revisit them once a month, or I revisit them every couple of weeks, and just do a little bit, and then I'm stuck again. But every time I let a couple of weeks go by and I go back, I can move it forward just a little bit until everything clicks, and I'm like, it's ready, and then I'll lay it out, design it, and then work on building it.
What are your hobbies or interests outside of your work? And is there any carryover in terms of methods or ideology?
So I have a 3-year-old son, and so his hobbies are my hobbies now. And so, I like dinosaurs and cars and rainbows. But no, more seriously, I mean, at this point, Mike, I'm 41, so I'm sort of in this, the I don't know what they would describe as the most productive phase of your life or whatever. And so hobbies, they're not as overt hobbies as they used to be. I think they just sort of tend to be these like sort of tangentially interesting things that are around my work. I have a 3D printer I tinker with sometimes, but that inevitably finds its way into my work. The book that you have behind you that I sent you is a perfect example. I did that just sort of as a sort of interest project, and quickly, like, designing your own book, writing your own book, doing layout and all that stuff. It starts out as an interest, and then it just becomes consumed by your vocation. And I think that's been the case for a while now. That just, if it doesn't serve double duty as fun and productive, it doesn't always. There's not always time for it. But since we've all been sort of stuck inside for the last year, there's been a lot of like home renovation stuff. We built, me and my wife built some big, lovely gardens in the backyard, and I put on a deck, that sort of stuff. But that's not really stuff that you would consider as a hobby per se. It's just sort of
it's real life, though.
Yeah, you do it. I mean, you do it for fun, but I don't know. I don't know if I would point to, like, I'm not like a bowler or something like that. I have neighbors who rock climb, and that all looks very fun, but I just much rather be in. My shop is in my house, so it's like I'm in my office, I'm in the basement, and maybe I'm reading like some news in between, and sort of like, but I'm always sort of got one hand like working on something, and so I like to cook and do things like that, but it's just half of my brain is always working.
So ultimately, or I don't know if ultimately, that's a little too forward, but let's say in the next like few years, once we're out of this hellscape, what would you want to accomplish with your work? What do you hope to accomplish with your work?
That's a really hard question. Because it's all I've ever done. It's a process, right? It's like this journey. So to sort of state a destination would be sort of antithetical in a weird way. So I've been just sort of just very much working. It's a conversation I'm having with myself, and my sort of like trip through like learning how to build things. And so my work has gotten more complicated over the years. Originally I was just making, aesthetic objects, and now I'm making these sort of more involved mechanical objects, and sort of spreading out to comment on other craft forms and other medium. But I don't know where that's going. I don't know if it needs to go anywhere really. So I don't know. Accomplished is a tough word.
Yeah.
I think, I've always wanted to show my work at the Visionary Art Museum, but it's like one of my favorite places, but I don't really consider that to be, an accomplishment. It's just sort of a thing that I'd like to do. So I'm going to just leave that there. I don't know. It's a tough one. I think it's like asking a kid what he wants to be when he grows up, and they shouldn't have to answer that question.
No, you're right. And that is a tough question where, it's like, how do we define that and so on. But I think what I'm kind of grasping from what you've been saying the entire time is like staying interested in what you're doing and learning, because that's the thing, that you're picking up so many different skills. I need you to figure out a way to machine to do some machine stuff for my podcast, like make the microphone just come towards me and I don't have to set up anything. It's just like, oh, just sit down in the chair. Oh, thanks, Christopher. Appreciate you.
I would do that, except I've been working for myself so long that it's impossible for me to like do anything that it isn't just the thing that I have to be doing right now. It's that like, I get a lot of people asking me to make furniture, and I'm just like, there's just nothing in me that wants to make furniture. I just want to make the things that are in this head, and that's it. And so I don't, I don't begrudge furniture. I don't begrudge anyone who does anything other than, it's just, I got to listen to what's in this head of mine and go with it. But yeah,
I dig it. Got a couple more questions before we wrap up here. So let's say money and access isn't an issue in this scenario. If you could work with one metal, what would it be and why? And what's that metal that you don't like working with?
Copper is pretty horrendous to work with. It's just really sticky and gummy and gooey, and it breaks things, and it's I don't know. It's like trying to cut butter that's not quite cold enough. I don't know. Money and access isn't an issue. Money and access are. I mean, I've been. I guess I don't want to understate how fortunate I feel to sort of been able to cobble together a living off of my art and to build the machine shop that I have. But when you sort of look at it in the context of what's out there in terms of commercial manufacturing equipment, my shop is very, very, very quaint. So I wouldn't say there's a metal that metal is affordable enough that if I want to work with it, I can work with it. Okay. I've actually recently made some pieces out of recovered meteorites and things like that. So like some very exotic stuff. But there are machine tools out there that cost $2.5 million to buy.
Wow.
And so
switch that to that.
I don't have access to those tools. I don't know, and I'm not entirely sure I'd want to own something like that. I think it's important to me, and I think it's necessary. It's a necessary element of any studio art practice to sort of be able to own the means of production, to be able to own your tools, have them in a safe space, and be able to experiment with them freely. and break them and fix them and do all those things that artists do as they're sort of finding their way. So maybe it doesn't make sense to own really expensive high-end equipment, but I there's a part of me that would love to tinker with some really nice tooling and equipment. That's just not feasible. But I would say that, the features of the affordable machine tools that I do have sort of outweigh that, and in the sense that I can break them and then I can fix them. And I think that's sort of a feature that an artist would want in their equipment. So yeah, that's definitely, there's definitely, I've been to industrial manufacturing, like trade shows where they have, this giant machine that can laser weld a shape out of powdered metal and then bring in a bunch of cutters and then cut it back down and make stuff out of it. And that's all really fascinating technically and, from an artistic standpoint, but having the infrastructure to really employ that myself. Yeah. There are lots of examples of blue chip artists who hire engineering firms to just make all this stuff for them using this state-of-the-art equipment. But when I try to talk about my practice, I try to talk about it in terms of a studio artist who is doing the making, and in that context, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But no, I guess it doesn't mean I can't think about it. So
the last question I have, got to have the Baltimore question. Got to have questions about Baltimore.
Sure.
For you, what does it mean to be an artist with ties and connections to Baltimore?
What does it mean?
Because, and that comes from the position of Baltimore has this reputation. So
what reputation does it have?
A bad one.
A bad one. I don't think it has a bad reputation. I guess the thing that I think about Baltimore, or when I think of LA, like the first thing that comes to mind to me is like pop surrealism.
Yeah.
I think in New York, it's like this sort of like impenetrable, self-referential, what's the word? Conceptualism, right? It's like conceptualism about itself.
Yeah.
And Baltimore, what do you think of when you think of Baltimore's art scene? I
think of DIY. I think of
exactly, and I think that's it. I think that's the beauty of Baltimore. Like, I'm just a guy in Baltimore doing my thing, and I don't have to worry if I'm relevant or if I'm in the scene or if I'm with going with whatever's popular this year. And every artist I know in Baltimore is like that. They're just their own. They're just doing their own thing, and that's cool. And there's no aesthetic. Like, Baltimore doesn't have like this defined aesthetic. Like, you can point to every art school has its own little, cookie cutter aesthetic or thing that they're known for. And Baltimore is just like, I just get to be Chris, and I get to make, the things that I make here. And I think that's the beauty of this town. So, I guess that's the best answer I could give to that.
No, that's a legit answer. So that's all I have. And this podcast goes, we like to allow people to have their opportunity to plug away. So anything you want to plug, social media, any hot takes you want to plug before we get out of here?
I'm not really that self-promoting. Instagram is C_Bathgate. You can I have an old-fashioned website, www.chrisbathgate.com. And if you're the type that doesn't like the idea that your only access to an audience is through one of the big names like Facebook or Instagram or anything else, I actually have an old-fashioned newsletter. It's just an email newsletter. I try to get people to sign up to that in case someone decides that they don't want me to have access to my audience anymore. So go to my website and sign up to the newsletter and, follow along. And I just do, it's like monthly postings about what I'm working on, what I'm thinking, and what's coming out of the shop.
Well, thank you. That's great. So thank you for coming on to the podcast. And
no, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I'll just wrap it up. So for Chris Bathgate, I am Rob Lee saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.